Hello and welcome to the OTB channel. You know, sometimes first impressions can be very wrong. And I think my first impressions of the i3 window manager almost 2 years ago were completely wrong, having looked at it again. I'm going to take you through why I've come to that conclusion. See you after the intro. Okay, welcome back. So we're doing i3 again. Initially I looked at this when I'd come off my little play around with OpenBox, which was really for me the gateway drug to window managers. And i3 was the first tiler I played with. And I did manage to get it configured and I did a video about it. But I was blowing hot and cold about it. I didn't spend that much time with it, if truth be known, a few weeks, and I was dropping down to the Mate desktop more often than I spent in i3, just because I felt really uncomfortable with all the key bindings, which I was struggling to get to grips with, and I wasn't used to a tiling windowing environment. So I didn't really give it a fair crack. When I moved on from i3 to BSPWM, I forced myself to stay in that for 2 months. And as a result, I really liked BSPWM. Not initially, but after 2 or 3 weeks, I got so used to it, I loved it. And I've always felt that if I'd done the same thing with i3 at the time, maybe I would have, thought the same. So I thought that perhaps I didn't give it a fair crack, and I've always felt a little bit guilty about that. So this is an opportunity to look again with new eyes. But it's also motivated by a few comments that viewers said after my DWM video. And it's all about Wayland. Steve, these ex-window managers are great, but what happens when Wayland takes over? And to be honest, Wayland's not anything I've given any thought to, but it started me thinking, what would I use if Xorg started to go and Wayland started to become dominant? What happens to all the old ex-window managers? I know that there's a variant of DWM based on Wayland, but it's in a very early alpha stage. And as far as I'm aware, that the most stable tiling window manager that uses Wayland at the moment is Sway. So I thought, well, maybe I need to look at Sway. But then I thought to myself, well, Sway, apparently you can just use an i3 configuration file with it, and most of your i3 configs will work. And to be honest, it's so long since I've used i3, I thought, well, before you look at Sway, you better go and have a look at i3 and, configure it as you like. And then we can kind of move on at some point in the future and perhaps look at what Sway has to offer. So that's why we're here. That's why I'm looking at i3. So I'm not going to start with any of my old configs from almost 2 years ago. We're going to start from scratch. I'll hit the button that says, do you want to create a config file and what key do you want to set for your mod? And we'll start from there and I'll take you through what I've actually done. I've spent, in actual fact, the last 2 weeks playing around with i3, and my opinion of it has changed drastically. I'll tell you now, a spoiler, although DWM is still my preference, I still prefer a dynamic window manager. I could live in i3, no problem whatsoever. So let's get stuck in. So here you see i3 in front of you. I decided not to go with any of my previous configuration files that I created for i3 a couple of years ago, but to actually start from scratch. And it reminded me just how bare and, let's face it, downright nasty an unconfigured window manager can look. I'm not surprised so many people new to tiling window managers who aren't quite sure how to configure them might take a look at this and and think, whoa, not for me. But we know better. We've worked with these things all the way along. So you start up i3, it'll create a configuration for you. It'll ask you whether you want to use the super key as your mod key or the alt key. I chose super because it's pretty much what I have all the time. And this is what you get. No wallpaper. You do get a bar, and it has some status items down here, which I believe are from the i3 status application. And if I hit super enter, it will open a terminal for me. Now, off the top of my head, I've no idea what this terminal actually is. You'll find in the configuration file that it searches for i3 simple terminal. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a specific type of terminal. It just means that i3 will go out. If you don't specify which terminal you want, it will open up one you've already got on your system. There's a list, basically, that it looks at, and it'll go through them until it finds one that you've got installed. Off the top of my head, I have absolutely no idea which this terminal is. But let's move on immediately. I'm going to open up the configuration file that it's just created for me at .config i3 config. And what you'll see is it's a really human-readable configuration file. This has always been the big plus about i3, and probably why it's one of the most popular tilers around. So just going through here, it's set my mod key to mod 4, which is a super key. It's setting a font monospace 8. It's setting up my environment, starting Dex, which I believe reads from your auto start folder. Isn't something I tend to use. You've got i3 lock there to lock the screen. And it's starting the NM applet. It's interesting. Has it got the NM applet starting here? It actually has. This isn't a virtual machine. This is on my hardware. And for some reason, it's put the NM applet on my secondary screen where OBS Studio's running at the moment. So it's over in the corner somewhere over there. And then you've got some controls for your audio keys, a float button, okay, start a terminal, and there you see i3 Sensible Terminal is starting. You've got your command to kill a window, mod shift Q, and then all the bits and pieces about changing focus. I know that one of the things that a lot of people get annoyed at is rather than the standard HJKL keys, it tends to use JKL and then semicolon. I can't say that worries me unduly, to be honest. And the one reason it does that is because it uses this horizontal orientation command there with mod H. So it can't use the H key unless you change it around and modify it completely. Now, these two keys here, split H and split V, are what really differentiate a manual tiler from something like DWM. If I just keep opening windows, it'll just open them like that. I think it's mod shift Q, to close them down. So with the likes of DWM, it'll open up by default in a master and stat layout. So you'll get one big window on the left, and then it'll start to launch other windows to the right underneath each other. So that works dynamically. And I quite like that layout, and I like that to just be automatic and not have to think about it. But if I just did something like now, let's say I wanted to open another window horizontally, I'd do mod H and then open a terminal. Now, if I open another terminal, it's going to do that again. Let's say I don't want that and I want a master stack. So I want basically to split this window on the right and have another window open up there. Well, then I would do a vertical split. So I would do Mod V, then open up the terminal. And I could open up another terminal like that, and then go back to Mod H and Mod V. You see how it can work. You essentially place the terminals wherever you want them to be. And some people prefer that. Personally, I just prefer the dynamic layout. But it's not a huge issue. I rarely have two windows open on any single workspace, so, it's not a major thing. The other big difference that I found here is the way that the workspaces work. So with DWM, you have up to 9 workspaces per monitor. So the workspaces are attached to a particular monitor. So if I could have 9 on my primary monitor and 9 on my secondary monitor. Here, the workspaces themselves are shared between the monitors. So I'm currently showing workspace 1 on my primary monitor that you're looking at, and over on my secondary monitor, which you can't currently see, that's workspace 2. And if I went now to workspace 2, it doesn't kind of swap them over so that workspace 2 is on this monitor and workspace 1 is on the other. It will simply move me over to the other monitor. It'll put the focus on that. So that's slightly a different way to work. Again, not a biggie, but just a little bit different from a dynamic window manager. And the manual placement of windows and the different way that it deals with workspaces, I'm okay with generally on the whole. The one thing that I struggle with is the resize mode. So let me open up another terminal here. i3 has this thing called modes, bind modes, which I can see the point of being particularly useful if you've used up most of your key bindings. So you create a particular mode separate from all the rest of the navigation keys that you've got that allows you to run certain commands that just do a specified task. Now, in the default configuration, this is probably best to show you this. If I wanted to, say, change the width of these windows, well, I believe I can do it. Can I? Just wondering if I can change the split. I think I have to grab hold of it. I'm meant to be able to just do this with my mouse, but I'm struggling a bit here to do it with my mouse. There we are. So if you do it, they say in the i3 documentation, the easiest thing to do is to change the size with your mouse. Well, I don't agree, really. If I wanted to change the size of these different windows with key bindings, I first have to put it into resize mode. And resize mode, I go into by hitting Mod R, and you see that the little resizers are shown up there. I can then, once I'm in resize mode, use my key bindings to change the size. And I'll just hit escape to get away with that. So I can see the point of resize. I don't like it. It doesn't feel comfortable to me or right. I can't see that I would ever use it. So the placement of windows is different. The way that it handles workspaces is very different. The way that it does resizing with these bind modes is quite different. And last but not least, I suppose for me, the thing that really niggles me is how you log out. And by default, you hit Mod Shift E and it brings up this bar. Now, this bar doesn't seem to be attached to your keys. So I can hit enter all I want and it's just changing that text file, as you can see. What I have to do to exit is to actually pick up my mouse and hit yes, exit. I'm just going to hit no there. And I'm going to shut this down now and not save anything. There we go. So this is the basics of i3. Now, you can obviously change this. You can put wallpaper on it. You can play about with the bar. You can play about with the status. This is i3 status, so I've played with that in the past. You can also use an alternative program called i3 Blocks, which is fine, but it will also work with Polybar. So I've taken this basic configuration, I've had a play, let me show you what I've ended up with. So, what a difference. This is my configured i3, which, as I've just said, took me about a couple of hours to play with. And yes, I know it looks remarkably like my DWM, but that's because I know what I like and I tend to replicate it across window managers. And I suppose if I was thinking, if eventually I have to look at something like Sway, if I can configure it in a way that I can live with, all good. So I've got Polybar up on the top, as you can see there, which I use Polybar because I've been using it for a while with the likes of Left WM. I know how to configure it. It's pretty simple. I'll briefly show you my configs, but this video isn't about how to configure Polybar, which is pretty easy, to be honest. It's really well commented default configuration files you get. But you can see here, you've got nice wallpaper, you've got a bar, I've got the bar at the top. You can actually see the system tray now on the right-hand side. And I've got all my bits and pieces that I normally have. I've got my Rofi, I've got my Rofi emoji. If I wanted to shut down, I can bring up my power menu. And I've got key bindings to all the bits and pieces that I normally use. So let's go over to the config and I'll show you what I've done. I've got Genie open here because I just thought it might be a little bit easier to see. The i3 documentation is pretty good, but I still had to use a fair bit of Google foo to find some of the options that I wanted. One of the first options that I wanted, and again this came from Matt at the Linux Cast, I noticed in his config files that he'd actually defined variables for each of his monitors at the beginning of the file. Really useful because although i3 does share your workspaces between your different monitors, I wanted it to be more controllable. So by defining the monitors as variables, I can define the first 5 workspaces to always start up on my primary monitor and workspaces 6 to 10 to start up on my secondary monitor. If you remember from when we looked at the defaults, workspace 1 was here and workspace 2 was the other side. Well, I can actually flick 1, 2, 3. As long as I go over the first 5, it's fine. And then when I get to 6, it moves the focus over to my other monitor. So that really works for me. I installed the i3 Gaps version of this. There was no configuration in the default file for it, but the i3 documentation is pretty good, and all I had to do was kind of insert this little set of commands here to get the gaps working properly. Also changed my font to Ubuntu Mono Nerd font, which I tend to use all the time. I've got my auto start items in here. So what have I got? I'm launching Polybar. I'm launching an authentication agent, the Marty authentication agent. I'm starting up Nitrogen. I'm setting my key map. And to be honest, this last one is null and void on this workstation because that is for my laptop, a lib input command. But nevertheless, all good. I've got all the standard audio key stuff, but I've also added some stuff for changing the screen brightness on my monitor, so that was fairly easy to use. I've set the terminal specifically to Alacrity. I've changed the kill key binding from Mod Shift Q just to Mod X. D menu, well, I'm not running D menu. I've changed it to Rofi, which is all good as far as I'm concerned. In terms of changing the focus, I've actually kept the key bindings pretty much as JKL and semicolon, because I've found that moving between, actually, the arrow keys are just as comfortable for me to go to, so it wasn't really an issue. Oops, and I've just shut that down. Let me open it up again. There we go. Yeah, so I've done a little bit of fiddling about here. What else have I done? I've had to keep the vertical and horizontal splits to manually place my windows. There is various applications out there where you can kind of define layouts and you can save layouts in i3. But to be honest, it doesn't bother me enough to worry about that. So, all good. And then you've got your various layouts. So you start off with Mod F, which is your full screen toggle. So that's great. Essentially monocle mode. I do like the fact that it covers up the bar. You've got a stacking layout. So if I go do Mod S, actually you can see here, it's like windows stacked one above the other. And I can move back and forwards between them. Quite like that. You've then got a tabbed layout with Mod W. And I have to say, since I've been playing with this, I've really got to like the tabbed layout. I believe there is a patch for DWM that you can install to get it to do the same sort of thing. And who knows, I might well do that. And of course, you can toggle between tiling and floating mode. So let me just go Mod E to send it all back to a standard tiling mode. And then I can toggle my tiling mode by doing Mod Shift Space. So Mod Shift Space. Now that should put them in tiling mode for some reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because it's just this. Let me shut this down. Yes, that's tiling. Mod Shift Space. Yeah, we're going from tiling to floating mode. I'm still getting used to the key bindings on this, as you can see. What else have I done? The switch to workspace stuff. Initially, there was just, if you wanted to switch to a workspace, all well and good. I could move this window to workspace 3 by doing Mod Shift 3, but I'd still be on 2 and I'd have to go back to over to 3 separately. But I've created some additional little key bindings where if I go Mod Control 2, the window not only moves back to 2, but I follow along. So that works for me. I've also, after doing quite a lot of reading, to be honest, learned how to do scratch pads, would you believe? And so I can now bring up, say, Pulse Mixer. And to send that back, I do Mod /. I can bring up HTOP and send that back. I can bring up Ranger and send it back. And I can just bring up a standard terminal. Job done. The scratch pads work in a very similar way to DWM. I've got quite used to using scratch pads and I do like them. So, yeah, all good. And what else have I done? I've put some colours in there just so that you get the borders and everything looking Nord-like. Yes, resizing. I've got rid of the resize mode and I've just created... Oh, right. Let me just get rid of that because I don't want it to open up like that. I want it to open up horizontally, so H, there we go. If I wanted to resize now, I just go Mod Control and I can use my arrow keys and I don't need to go into a resize mode. So the fact that I can do that makes me wonder why you need the resize mode as default in the default configuration. Oh, I do know what I said I'd have a quick look at. In terms of Polybar, I'm not going to go into great detail about Polybar. I already had a configuration file set up and the general settings remain pretty much the same. I've created 2 additional bars and I've put it into a separate config file. And the bars are great. They ask about, border size, colors, all the rest of it, and whether or not you want a tray. So I've got main bar i3 and extra i3. And it's pretty easy to configure, to be honest. The main thing that you're going to need if you use Polybar in i3 is the i3 module. But if you go onto the Polybar wiki, it gives you all the information there that you'll need. And that essentially is what puts the workspace names up on the left of Polybar. Haven't tended to go with little icons here for a very specific reason, really. Because of the way it displays the workspaces on the bar, just one at a time, whichever is the active one, it wouldn't make much sense just to have straightforward icons there. So I've left them as numbers, and that's pretty much worked for me. Okay, so that's my configuration of i3. I'm pretty impressed over the, on the whole, and I think my first impressions were very definitely wrong about this window manager, but let's go and have a chat. Right, so that's i3, and to be honest, it's come as a bit of a surprise to me. I didn't expect to really like it, but I ended up being really comfortable in it. Really easy to configure, no problem with that at all. Loads of functionality, all the functionality that I would use in DWM. I've got rid of most of the bits and pieces that I wasn't keen on. The manual tiling aspect of, having to hit H or mod H or mod V is the only slight irritant, but it's a minor thing overall. And taking a second look can really help. And of course, I'm 2 years on now. I've been using tilers for the best part of 2 years. So I'd like to think I know more about what I'm doing when it comes to messing about with config files. And it didn't take that long to set up as I wanted. So give it a go, have a look. I haven't put my configs up yet on GitLab. They will be up there a few days' time, but I've just got a few changes and things to modify before I put the final version up. But you will see it up there sometime during this week. Right, guys, so that's it for today. We'll be back to Slackware next week. I won't say what type of thing we're going to do, but we'll be back to Slackware, definitely. Thanks very much for supporting the channel, all of my Patreons. You can see their names in the background here. If you like the video, everyone else, please like and subscribe. It really helps, and I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.